The year is 2035, and the world is once again gripped by fear. The COVID virus, they say, has mutated, becoming something far more dangerous than before. Or maybe it didn't mutate on its own. Rumors swirl of experiments in secret laboratories, whispers of patient zero escaping into the world. No one knows the truth for sure, but what everyone does know is that this new strain doesn't just infect, it transforms. Hospitals that were once safe havens are now overwhelmed by chaos. Bodies no longer stay dead, cities burn, and governments scramble to keep control. But as the virus spreads uncontrollably, trust in the authorities fades, and society teeters on the brink of collapse. And in the midst of it all, the world watches as the news tries to keep up with the unfolding disaster.
It started as whispers, rumors of a flu-like illness spreading rapidly in small towns. The government dismissed it as a severe flu, urging calm. But behind the scenes, quarantine zones expanded, and military units locked down entire neighborhoods. Hospitals overflowed, and footage leaked online of the bodies convulsing, eyes bleeding, then reanimating, hostile, violent, unstoppable. The cover-up crumbled as the virus spread nationwide. The airborne pathogen did more than kill. It brought the dead back, turning them into relentless attackers. Cities descended into chaos, highways clogged with panicked citizens fleeing, while emergency broadcasts urged people to stay indoors. Amid the chaos, news networks scrambled to report the truth, and now the nation's eyes turned to the familiar face of Jason Marlone. The familiar jingle of the nightly news rang out, but tonight it felt wrong, distorted by the frantic whispers and urgent panicked movements behind the scene. Jason Marlone, the veteran anchor with an unshakable reputation, sat frozen at the desk, his usually composed demeanor unraveling before the viewers. Behind him, the station's polished logo had been replaced by stark emergency banners. Live and breaking news flashed in ominous blood-red letters. The air itself seemed to thicken with dread.
Good evening,
Jason began, his voice fraying with tension, as if every word carried a crushing weight.
Tonight we confront a crisis beyond anything in modern history.
He paused, his breath visibly shallow, his eyes darting across the teleprompter like a man who didn't want to believe the words he was about to speak.
Authorities have confirmed an airborne virus, highly contagious, sweeping across the nation. Its origins remain unknown, and...
Jason's throat tightened as he swallowed, his composure faltering for the first time.
It has already claimed thousands.
The tremor in his voice was a foreign sound, unsettling viewers accustomed to his calm. He cleared his throat, but it did little to hide the creeping fear in his eyes.
The virus mimics the symptoms of the flu at first, but quickly accelerates into something far more terrifying.
The screen cut abruptly to shaky, chaotic footage. City streets in ruin. Sirens howled incessantly as disoriented crowds surged in all directions, their faces twisted in terror. Amidst the chaos, paramedics rushed to aid a man who stumbled forward, his limbs jerking unnaturally. But they froze. Hesitation etched across their faces when the figure collapsed in front of them. The camera zoomed in, capturing the paramedics' dread as the body convulsed violently on the ground. And then, with a sickening crack of bones, the figure rose, its eyes hemorrhaging blood, its movements stiff and grotesque, like a puppet on frayed strings. The footage jolted back to the studio. Jason now sat visibly ashen under the glaring studio lights, beads of sweat trickling down his temple. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the desk, his fingers trembling despite his attempt to mask it.
The government advises all citizens to stay indoors,
Jason continued, but his voice was quieter now, wavering on the brink of collapse.
But there's something worse, the virus.
He stopped, his breath catching, as though he couldn't bear to say it.
It doesn't just kill. The infected, when they die, they reanimate. They become violent, unstoppable.
Suddenly, Jason coughed, a raspy, grating sound that tore through the tense silence of the studio. He waved off the concerned glances from the crew, but something was wrong. His normally steady voice had become a hollow rasp, and his skin, once tan and healthy, now gleamed with a sickly pallor under the harsh lights. A thin trickle of blood began to run from his nose, unnoticed by him, but not by his co-anchor, Lisa Moreau. Lisa's face drained of color, her eyes widening in alarm.
Jason?
She asked, her voice trembling, uncertainty laced with fear.
I'm fine.
Jason replied, though his words were now barely more than a strained whisper. His hands shook violently as his breaths became shallow, erratic. Blood smeared his upper lip, but he didn't seem to feel it. Lisa's eyes darted between Jason and the camera, her expression shifting from concern to outright panic.
Jason, you should...
Lisa's words were cut off by Jason's sudden, violent convulsion. His body twisted unnaturally, and his hands clamped onto the desk, veins bulging grotesquely beneath his skin, pulsing as if alive with infection. His head jerked back, eyes wide, panic radiating from them as his breaths turned into ragged gasps. A thick, dark vein throbbed beneath his pale skin, snaking its way up to his temple. Then, he collapsed forward. The studio erupted into chaos. Crew members shouted in disarray, but none dared approach as Jason's body began to writhe on the floor, his muscles contorting unnaturally. The veins on his face darkened, bulging like black vines, spreading over his throat and jawline. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, rolled back, leaving only lifeless whites. For a moment, Jason lay still, his chest unmoving as if death had finally claimed him. But then, with a sickening crack, his body snapped upright. His eyes flickered open, not human eyes, but clouded dead things, glazed over with a gray, inhuman sheen. His lips curled back, revealing blood-stained teeth in a feral snarl.
Jason!
Lisa's voice was little more than a terrified whisper now, as she took slow, fear-stricken steps backward. Jason's body moved, but it was no longer Jason. His movements were stiff, jerky, his limbs puppet-like as he staggered to his feet. His hollow, dead gaze locked onto Lisa, a deep growl vibrating through the air. And then, with terrifying speed, he lunged. The desk toppled over with a deafening crash, equipment clattering to the floor as Jason charged. Lisa screamed, her voice filled with raw terror as she scrambled to get away. But Jason, no, the thing he had become, was too fast. His hands gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in with inhuman strength, leaving dark purple bruises.
Jason, no!
Lisa shrieked, but her words were futile. With a low, guttural snarl, Jason buried his teeth into her neck, tearing into her flesh. Blood erupted from the wound, spraying across the studio floor in thick rivulets as Lisa's screams pierced the air, sharp and agonized. She thrashed, but her strength was no match for the monstrous grip that held her.
Help me! Please! Someone help!
Lisa's voice was growing weaker, her pleas drowned out by the grotesque sounds of ripping flesh and gnashing teeth. Her legs kicked feebly as the life drained from her body, her strength fading with each second. The camera zoomed in, whether by accident or intent was unclear, capturing every horrific detail as Jason's teeth sank deeper into her throat, shredding muscle and bone with savage ferocity. His face, now drenched in blood, contorted into a gruesome, almost gleeful grin as he continued his brutal assault. The feed flickered, the image warping as the camera operator stumbled back, terror-stricken. But before they could escape, Jason, his blood-smeared face twisted in a predatory snarl, turned toward the camera. His lifeless, soulless eyes fixed on the lens, and with a sudden burst of motion, he lunged. The final image seared into viewers' minds was Jason's blood-drenched face, inches from the camera, teeth bared, before the screen cut to static.